The night before the national entrance exam, a stranger knocked on my door and calmly announced that my life was built on a mistake. She claimed she was the real daughter of my parents, switched at birth, and she had chosen this exact moment to return. My name is Lin Yue, and unlike her, I was not reborn. I was someone who had fallen into a story and learned how cruel timing could be. I grew up in comfort, but never in arrogance. My parents loved me, educated me, and trusted me, and I repaid that trust with discipline and silence. Studying was my way of proving I deserved the life I had been given, even before I knew it might not have been mine. The girl who appeared looked fragile, dressed plainly, and spoke with rehearsed humility. Her eyes were wet but alert, as if she had practiced crying in a mirror until she could turn it on with a breath. She introduced herself as Lin Ruo and said she had been abandoned, raised by distant relatives, and forced to survive without the advantages I'd enjoyed. She apologized for coming so late, apologized for existing, apologized in a way that asked to be praised for her apology. My mother's hand started shaking before my father even invited her in. Blood resemblance is a powerful weapon, and she wielded it with a gentleness that felt sharpened. My parents were the kind of people who believed love could be measured by sacrifice. They had sacrificed for me. So the idea that they had accidentally sacrificed their own child to a mistake made my mother's breath catch like it had been stolen. My father tried to stay rational, but his rationality was built around order, and this was disorder knocking politely on our doorstep. Lin Ruo chose the timing with precision. The night before the exam, when any emotional turbulence would have a measurable cost. She expected me to break, to lash out, to become the villain she could later describe as a spoiled fake. She stared at my school books on the table as if they were evidence of theft. I didn't tell them the first truth. I already knew. 2 months earlier, I had been helping my father organize old files for a donation program at a children's hospital. A stray document fell out of a folder, a photocopied roster with a date that matched my birth. The hospital had been investigated for record-keeping errors that year. That night, curiosity turned into a cold itch that would not let me sleep. So I asked a friend whose mother worked at the hospital archive to check one detail: whether my mother's admission bracelet number matched the infant wristband number in the system. It didn't. 1 digit off, the kind of error that looks like a typo until you realize typos can move babies. I didn't run to my parents with it because I needed certainty, not suspicion. I took a DNA test quietly at a clinic across town, paid in cash, used a P.O. box for delivery, and waited without allowing my face to show the waiting. When the envelope arrived, I opened it alone in my bedroom and read the result twice. Not a match. The paper didn't make me cry. It didn't make me angry. It made the world feel like a room where the furniture had been moved in the dark. I had 2 choices: collapse under the weight of uncertainty, or treat it like a problem to solve. I chose the second. I began preparing for a day like this, even if I didn't know what form it would take. So when Lin Ruo sat on our sofa and told her story, I listened as if I were listening to a speech I needed to grade. I noted what she emphasized and what she skipped. She spoke about hardship, but she rarely spoke about the people who had raised her. She spoke about destiny, but she spoke too confidently about outcomes, like someone who had rehearsed a script that assumed other actors would obey their cues. She watched my mother's reactions and adjusted her words accordingly. When my father asked for proof, she produced a crumpled letter from a social worker and a hospital bracelet she claimed belonged to her. The bracelet's ink looked too fresh for a 17-year-old relic. My father noticed it too, but my mother's tears were louder than his doubt. "We should do a test," my father said gently. Lin Ruo nodded with a tragic smile that suggested she was bracing for rejection. My mother immediately said, of course, we'll do everything," and hugged her as if hugging could reverse time. I understood then how she planned to win. She wasn't fighting me in the exam hall. She was fighting me in my mother's heart, and emotions were her chosen battlefield. My father wanted to schedule the test for after the exam. Lin Ruo lowered her eyes and said she understood, but her voice trembled in a way that made my mother feel cruel for asking her to wait. The argument lasted 5 minutes, and every second of it was designed to smear into my night like ink. I stepped in, not with anger, but with a calm that forced the room to look at me instead of at her performance. "We can do the test tomorrow afternoon," I said. "The exam is in the morning. We can keep the evening quiet." My mother looked relieved. Lin Ruo looked briefly disappointed, then hid it under gratitude. After she went to the guest room, my parents stood in the kitchen like strangers in their own home. My mother asked me if I was scared. I answered honestly, "I'm focused." That wasn't the same as fearless. It was simply the strategy that had kept me from being manipulated for years. My father asked if I believed her. I said, "We'll believe the result." He nodded, grateful for a sentence that sounded like a plan. That night, I didn't study. I slept. Not because I was unaffected, but because sleep was the most defiant thing I could do. Lin Ruo's whole entrance was engineered to steal my rest, to make my brain foggy when I faced the first math section. I refused to donate that advantage to her. I set my alarm, put my exam admission ticket under my pencil case, and lay down with the steadiness of someone who had already mourned the worst outcome in private. In the morning, my mother offered to drive me. Lin Ruo appeared in the hallway in a plain dress, looking like an orphaned saint, and said she would wait at home so as not to disturb me. The words were modest, but the posture was a dagger. "Look at me. I'm so considerate. Love me." My mother nearly stayed. I took my mother's hand and said, "Come with me. I want you there." My mother came, because she had raised me to ask clearly for what I needed. In the car, she kept glancing at me, as if trying to memorize my face before it could be taken away. I stared out the window and practiced breathing without flinching. The exam hall smelled like dust and sanitizer. I sat at my assigned desk and wrote my name with a steady hand. Around me, other students were terrified of formulas and time. I was terrified of timing too, but mine had a different villain. When the first question paper landed, my mind didn't wander to the sofa at home. It went to the page in front of me. I answered like a machine that had been trained not by emotion but by repetition. That discipline didn't make me cold. It made me unstealable. When the exam ended, the hallway outside was loud with relief. Parents waved water bottles, friends compared answers, and rumors about difficult sections spread like wildfire. My mother hugged me too tightly, then quickly loosened as if afraid her hug would become a goodbye. "Let's go home," she said. I nodded. We drove back, and the whole city looked the same, indifferent to whether families shattered behind closed doors. At home, my father had already arranged the clinic appointment. Lin Ruo sat at the dining table, hands folded, eyes red in a way that suggested she had cried for hours without smudging her face. My mother kept offering food. Lin Ruo refused politely, insisting she didn't deserve to take anything until the truth was known. The performance was so precise it almost impressed me. Almost. Because real hunger makes people less elegant. At the clinic, we gave samples. The nurse spoke cheerfully about turnaround times. Lin Ruo smiled at her as if gratitude were oxygen. I watched my father's jaw clench at every delay. My mother kept her fingers laced through mine the entire time, as if touch could anchor reality. I let her, because my mother needed anchoring, and I had learned that love sometimes looks like allowing someone to hold you even when you feel like you're floating. The result arrived 2 days later. My father opened the email at the kitchen table while my mother stood behind him. Lin Ruo sat across from me, chin lowered, eyes ready. My father's shoulders sagged first. My mother made a small sound, half gasp, half sob. Lin Ruo was indeed their biological daughter. I was not. The sentence didn't need to be spoken aloud. It detonated anyway. My mother looked at me as if I had tricked her by existing. Then she looked at Lin Ruo as if apologizing for not finding her sooner. Then she looked at both of us, and the guilt in her face became a third person in the room. Lin Ruo cried softly, the way people do when they want to be seen as grateful rather than furious. She said, "I don't want to take her place." And then paused, because of course she did, and the pause was the truth leaking through. My father cleared his throat and said, "We will take responsibility." He tried to include me in the statement, but responsibility is a word that can mean many things, and none of them are comfortable when spoken over a child's head. I stood up and said, "I already knew." The room froze. My mother's eyes widened like she had been slapped by time itself. My father whispered my name. Lin Ruo stopped crying for half a heartbeat. I continued, calm. "I did a test weeks ago. I didn't tell you because I didn't want to disrupt the exam, and because you deserve to decide what to do with truth when you weren't being forced." My father sat back slowly. My mother covered her mouth. Lin Ruo's face tightened, then relaxed into something like admiration mixed with alarm. She hadn't expected me to have my own information. She hadn't expected me to be prepared. That evening, while my parents tried to process their grief and guilt, I packed a suitcase, not out of spite, and not because I believed I didn't belong. I packed because I understood the next phase of the story. Lin Ruo would claim the space, and my mother would cling to her out of guilt. and my presence would become a daily reminder of failure. Guilt can curdle into resentment. I refused to let my mother resent me for a mistake she hadn't made on purpose. I also refused to compete for affection with a girl who treated affection like currency. I left a letter on my bed. It didn't accuse. It didn't beg. It thanked them for raising me with kindness, acknowledged the truth, and asked for one thing. Please do not treat love as a debt that needs repayment. Love is not a ledger. I signed it with my full name. Then I walked out before anyone could stop me. Because if I waited, my mother would cry, and I might stay out of habit rather than choice. My biological parents lived in a smaller apartment across the river. I had located them through the clinic's optional matching database, then verified quietly through public records. They were ordinary people with ordinary fatigue. When I knocked on their door, my biological mother stared at me as if she were seeing a ghost that looked like herself. My biological father's hands trembled as he offered me slippers. They weren't cruel, just overwhelmed. They had a son already, an older boy who looked at me with suspicion and then curiosity, because he didn't know whether I was a threat or a sister. We sat around a table with cheap tea and expensive silence. My biological mother asked if I was angry. I answered, "No, I'm here to understand." That was mostly true. Anger would have been easier if someone had been intentionally evil, but the evil here was negligence, and negligence rarely has a face you can punch. My biological parents told me about the day I was born. A crowded ward, a power outage, nurses rushing, babies crying. They had been told their infant had died within hours due to complications. They had grieved for years in a way that makes a person careful with happiness afterward. My existence reopened grief and rewrote it into something else. My presence was both miracle and accusation, and I could see them wrestling with both. I told them about my exam, about my plans for university, about my scholarship prospects. They listened with awe and fear. Awe because I sounded like someone from a different world. Fear because they worried they couldn't support me. I said I didn't need them to become wealthy overnight. I needed them to be honest. "I'm not here to punish you for being poor," I said. "I'm here because I'm yours, and because I want to build something that doesn't depend on anyone else's guilt." My biological father nodded, eyes wet. My biological mother touched my hand as if checking that I was solid. In the weeks that followed, I lived between two homes without fully belonging to either. My adoptive mother called daily at first, voice strained, trying to thread the impossible needle of loving both daughters without betraying either. Lynn Ruo sometimes took the phone and spoke with exaggerated sweetness, asking me if I was adjusting and suggesting that I was brave for letting go. She framed my departure as a noble surrender, which made my stomach twist. Noble surrender is still surrender, and she wanted a story where she was the rightful heroine and I was the grateful extra. I refused to play that role. I responded politely, refused to argue, and saved every message. Not because I wanted to use them immediately, but because documentation is a shield against narratives. Lynn Ruo began setting small traps. A bracelet disappeared from my adoptive mother's jewelry box and later appeared in my biological brother's backpack when we visited. Lynn Ruo discovered it and gasped theatrically, implying theft without saying it. My adoptive mother looked torn. My biological brother panicked, swearing he hadn't taken anything. I asked to see the bracelet. The clasp had a microscopic scratch near the hinge, a scratch I had photographed months earlier when my mother asked me to insure her valuables. The scratch was new. The bracelet had been handled recently, not stolen weeks ago. I said calmly, "This doesn't prove anything except someone moved it." Lynn Ruo's eyes flashed, then softened again. She was learning I wouldn't collapse into emotion on command. Another time, an anonymous email reached my school counselor claiming I was unstable due to identity trauma and might be a risk during scholarship interviews. The email used phrases Lynn Ruo had used in conversation, but she denied any involvement and cried about being accused. I didn't accuse her out loud. I asked the counselor for the email headers and forwarded them to a cybersecurity student I knew from a competition team. The headers traced back to a cafe network near Lynn Ruo's part-time job. Coincidence is a thin mask. I saved the report, kept my tone neutral, and continued with my scholarship applications. When admission results arrived, I ranked first in the city. The announcement came over the school loudspeaker, and my classmates cheered, like my success belonged to all of us. My biological parents cried at home. My adoptive father sent one text, "Proud of you. Whatever your blood, you earned this." My adoptive mother arrived at my school gate with flowers. Lynn Ruo didn't come. Later I learned she had barely passed. She had expected my disruption to become her advantage. Instead, my discipline became my weapon. University opened a wider world, a place where my surname mattered less than my output. I chose economics first, not because I worshipped money, but because economics is the language institutions use when they justify who deserves what. I wanted to speak that language fluently. I took a part-time job in the library, joined a data club, and learned to treat problems like puzzles rather than insults. Lynn Ruo enrolled at a lower-tier college nearby and tried to keep herself attached to my orbit, telling relatives that she supported me and implying my success was still a family achievement. Family, in her mouth, meant ownership. She attempted a bigger move in second year. An online rumor spread that I had cheated in the exam and bribed an official. It was ridiculous, but rumors don't need logic to do damage. They need repetition. Lynn Ruo's classmates began posting pitying comments about how she had been robbed of her rightful place. I knew she was behind it because the rumor included an oddly specific detail about a proctor's surname information only a family member would know from my casual recounting. I didn't argue online. I asked my university's integrity office to request the exam center's CCTV logs and seating chart. Then I compared them with the rumor's claims. The timeline didn't match. The proctor in question wasn't even in my room. I compiled the evidence into a clean dossier and sent it to the platform with a legal notice from a student law clinic. The posts vanished in 48 hours. Lynn Ruo called me crying, accusing me of humiliating her. I answered, "You humiliated yourself by lying." Then I hung up. It was the first time I let my voice carry steel. My adoptive parents finally began to see the cracks in Lynn Ruo's performance, not because I persuaded them, but because performance fails under proximity. Lynn Ruo spent money recklessly and blamed trauma when confronted. She demanded expensive tutoring and then skipped sessions. She posted pictures of luxury gifts with captions about healing, as if healing were a brand. My adoptive mother tried to excuse everything, clinging to guilt like a lifeboat. My adoptive father grew quieter and more distant, which is how he processed disappointment. When Lynn Ruo complained that I had stolen her education, my adoptive father replied, "Education isn't stolen, it's used." The sentence landed like a door closing. Lynn Ruo resented him for it, and resentment is hard to hide. In my biological home, life was simpler but not easier. Money was tight. My biological parents argued about bills in whispers, thinking I couldn't hear. My biological brother, Lin Chen, felt replaced by my arrival and fought me for attention in small ways, borrowing my charger, taking the seat by the fan, mocking my rich kid habits. I didn't retaliate. I asked him to teach me how to navigate our neighborhood, which markets had the best prices, which bus routes were safest at night. The request surprised him. Over time, his hostility softened into a grudging alliance. He started calling me sis in front of friends, as if claiming me made him look stronger rather than weaker. By third year, I had interned at a fintech startup and learned how easily systems can be manipulated when people assume the system is neutral. I worked on fraud detection models, and the irony wasn't lost on me. My whole life had been a fraud detection problem. Only the fraud had been in paperwork and guilt, rather than in code. I began building my own tools, small scripts that flagged anomalies in datasets. I loved the clarity of numbers. They don't cry, they don't plead, they just reveal patterns. Then an opportunity arrived that forced my two worlds to collide. A scholarship foundation funded by a group of corporate donors offered a competitive grant for students with strong academic records and a compelling life story. Lynn Ruo applied too. She framed herself as the switched-at-birth survivor who had returned to reclaim her family. She used photos of my adoptive mother, crying at a family dinner. She used my existence as a prop in her narrative. I discovered this when a mutual acquaintance forwarded me her application essay, thinking I would find it inspiring. I didn't find it inspiring. I found it predatory. I could have responded with my own essay about hardship, but I refused to turn my family's pain into content. Instead, I submitted an application built on work, project outcomes, data tools, internship performance. In the optional personal section, I wrote 3 sentences about identity and choice, without naming anyone. I knew some judges would prefer tragedy. Let them. I wasn't auditioning for pity. During the finalist interview, one panelist asked me why my file contained notes about online harassment rumors. I answered with the truth, framed clinically. Someone had attempted reputational sabotage. I had documented the claims. I had resolved them through evidence. I had learned to prioritize verification over reaction. The panelist nodded, impressed not by my pain but by my method. Another judge asked if I resented the girl who had returned. I said, "Resentment is a tax. I don't pay it." Lynn Ruo, in her interview, cried. She talked about destiny. She implied I was cold. The judges watched. One of them later told me, privately, that they had seen enough performance in their careers to recognize it. I won the scholarship. Lynn Ruo didn't. She exploded. This time she didn't bother with subtle traps. She confronted me outside the auditorium, shouting that I had stolen her future again. Cameras from students' phones captured everything. She shouted about blood and entitlement, about how my first-place ranking should have been hers by birthright. In the video, my face stayed calm. I said, loud enough for the phones to record, "Birth gives you a starting point. What you do after that is yours." She tried to slap me. A security guard stepped in. The video went viral in our campus circles. Lynn Ruo became a cautionary clip. My adoptive mother called me that night, sobbing, finally apologizing for not protecting me from Lynn Ruo's games. She said she felt like she had to make it up to her biological child and didn't know how to do that without losing me. I told her gently, "You don't make love up by subtracting it from someone else." She cried harder. My adoptive father took the phone and said, "If you're willing, we'd like to see you." No conditions, no performances. I agreed. I wasn't returning to compete. I was returning to close a door properly. When I visited, Lynn Ruo refused to greet me. She locked herself in her room and played music loudly like a teenager, even though she was the same age as me. My adoptive mother looked exhausted, as if guilt had finally eaten its way through her hope. Over tea, my adoptive father asked me what I wanted. I answered, clarity. We discussed boundaries. No one would use my achievements as a weapon. No one would accuse me without evidence. And if Lynn Ruo attempted harassment again, my adoptive parents would not ask me to stay silent for the sake of family harmony. Harmony built on lies is not harmony. It's a hostage situation. My adoptive father agreed immediately. My adoptive mother hesitated, then agreed too. That moment didn't heal everything, but it changed the rules. And rule changes matter. Lynn Ruo's final move came months later. After she failed another entrance exam and her frustration had nowhere to go, she tried to contact my biological brother, offering him money to help her prove I was manipulating our adoptive parents. Lin Chen showed me the messages. He looked embarrassed, as if admitting someone had tried to recruit him made him complicit. I said, "You did the right thing by telling me." We printed the messages, saved the screenshots, and forwarded them to my adoptive father with a simple note. "This is what she's doing." My adoptive father replied with one sentence. "Thank you for the evidence." The next week, Lynn Ruo was sent abroad under supervision to live with a distant aunt and attend a program my adoptive father paid for. Not as reward, but as containment. The family had finally accepted that affection does not obligate surrender. In my final year, I built a small company with 2 classmates, focusing on verification tools for scholarship and aid program software that flagged identity mismatches, suspicious timing, and coordinated rumor patterns. We called it Clear Mosaic. It began as a class project and became a contract when a foundation asked to license it. I laughed when I signed the paperwork because fate has a strange sense of symmetry. The girl switched at birth now built systems to stop other lives from being reassigned by paperwork. Years later, when I spoke at a conference about integrity in data and the ethics of verification, someone in the audience asked if my childhood still haunted me. I answered carefully. It taught me that identity is not decided by birth, nor stolen by imposters. It is constructed daily through choice. I didn't mention Lynn Ruo by name. I didn't need to. She had become a footnote in my story, not the author. The part people rarely ask about is the hospital. They prefer stories with villains who can be booed and defeated in one scene, but the hospital was a system, and systems don't feel shame. After the scholarship interview incident, I requested my own birth records through the proper channels. The clerk at the records office smiled too brightly and told me files from that year were incomplete. Incomplete is a polite way to say, "We would like you to stop asking." I didn't stop. I filed a second request with the Provincial Health Bureau, then a third through a public information statute a professor taught in a governance seminar. Bureaucracy expects exhaustion. I treated it like training. 3 months later, I received a thin envelope containing photocopies with blacked-out names. The blackout marks were sloppily done. You could see faint letters under the ink. The nurses' signatures were inconsistent across pages, and one timestamp was impossible. It placed my mother's discharge before her recorded admission. In a class on auditing, my professor said, "Errors cluster." I stared at those pages and saw the cluster. Someone had cleaned the record. Not to correct it, but to hide how messy it had been. A friend from the data club helped me run a simple analysis. We compiled anonymized birth time data from public health reports and compared it to the hospital's reported delivery count that week. The hospital's number of births and the number of newborn screenings didn't match. A gap. Small enough to ignore, large enough to contain several switched wristbands. When I brought this to my adoptive father, he didn't dismiss it as obsession. He called a lawyer. Not to sue for money, but to force disclosure. The lawyer told us the hospital would fight, claiming patient privacy. My adoptive father replied, "Privacy shouldn't protect negligence." The case moved slowly. Hospitals have patience because they have time. In the meantime, I built my life anyway. I refused to put my future on pause while a system decided whether my past mattered. Still, the legal process changed my family dynamics in unexpected ways. My adoptive mother attended meetings with the lawyer and listened without interrupting. Each new document seemed to pull her guilt into focus and then burn it down to something smaller and more manageable. Responsibility. She began volunteering at a child advocacy group, not for redemption points, but because she needed to place her guilt somewhere useful. Watching her do that, I learned that accountability is a form of love when it stops being about self-punishment and becomes about prevention. Lynn Ruo heard about the hospital case from relatives. From abroad, she sent a message that began, predictably, with, "I'm sorry," and ended with a request. She wanted us to stop because the investigation made her anxious. The request revealed the truth. She didn't want the hospital exposed because exposure might reveal details that complicated her preferred narrative of being uniquely wronged. If the hospital had switched multiple babies, then her return wasn't destiny. It was one branch among many. I didn't reply. Silence was cleaner than argument. At graduation, my biological parents sat in the front row in borrowed formal clothes that didn't fit perfectly but looked proudly worn. My adoptive parents sat a few rows behind them, close enough to be seen, far enough to avoid making the day a performance. Lin Chen sat between my biological parents, posture stiff, pretending he didn't care until my name was called. When I walked across the stage, he shouted my name anyway. It startled him as much as it startled the crowd. Afterward, he acted embarrassed and said he did it because someone had to. I hugged him, and he didn't push me away. It was the closest he came to saying he was proud. Clear Mosaic grew faster than I expected. Foundations and universities didn't want to admit they had vulnerability, but they wanted protection. We marketed the product as fairness infrastructure, tools that flagged suspicious identity claims, coordinated harassment campaigns, and application narratives that relied on unverifiable tragedy instead of verifiable work. We were careful. Verification can become oppression if misused. So we built transparency into the system. Every flag had to cite a reason. Every reason had to be reviewable. And every applicant had a right to respond. The rule was simple. Evidence first. Humanity always. One evening, after a long day of negotiations, I found my adoptive father waiting at a cafe near my office. He looked older than I remembered, not because time had been cruel, but because he had allowed himself to feel. He told me the hospital had agreed to a settlement that included a public apology and a funded overhaul of their newborn identification protocols. The lawyer said it was a rare win, and not just because of the money. The hospital would now be audited annually by an independent board. My adoptive father slid the signed agreement across the table and said, "This doesn't give you back anything we took by accident, but it might stop it from happening again." I nodded. "That's enough," I said, and surprised myself by meaning it. The news story ran for a week. Reporters called it a scandal. Commentators argued about blame. People online wanted my face, my tears, my opinion on whether I forgave anyone. I refused interviews. Lynn Ruo, however, tried to insert herself. She posted a thread about how she had endured so much and how the hospital case validated her. The internet rewarded her briefly. Then someone unearthed the campus video of her trying to slap me and linked it under her thread. Her post stopped trending. Narratives collapse when they collide with receipts. Months later, Lynn Ruo asked to meet me when she returned briefly to renew paperwork. She suggested a neutral place, a bookstore cafe. When she arrived, she looked less fragile and more tired. The way people look when performance has been their job for too long. She told me she hated being compared to me. I said, "Then stop comparing yourself." She laughed bitterly and said, "I made everything sound easy." I answered, "I make it sound clear. Clear is not the same as easy." For a moment, she looked like a person rather than a plot device. She admitted she had chosen the exam night because she believed chaos would make my score drop. She said it as if confessing might earn her absolution. I didn't grant it. I said, "Confession is a start, not a payment." She asked if I would ever accept her as a sister. I thought about the traps, the rumors, the attempt to recruit Lin Chen, and the way she had treated my mother's guilt like a faucet to turn on and off. Then I thought about something else. She had been raised in scarcity and had learned that attention was a resource you had to fight for. That didn't excuse her, but it explained why she believed love was a prize. I told her, "If you stop using people, we can be civil. If you keep using people, we won't be anything." She nodded slowly, as if hearing rules in a language she hadn't learned. After that meeting, she didn't become a better person overnight. Real change doesn't happen in one scene. But the harassment stopped. The baiting stopped. Occasionally, she would send a message about a job application or a class she had taken, phrased awkwardly, like someone practicing sincerity. I responded briefly and politely. That was the boundary. A door not slammed, but not wide open. Lin Chen benefited most from the quiet that followed. Without family chaos constantly refilling the room, he focused on his own path. He asked me for help applying to technical training programs. I didn't write his essays. I taught him how to structure them. When he received acceptance into a paid apprenticeship, he hugged my biological mother so hard she laughed and cried at once. Later, he thanked me in the simplest way. He fixed my laptop fan without being asked and pretended it was nothing. Years passed, and my family became less like a battlefield and more like a complicated map. My adoptive mother attended therapy and learned the difference between guilt and responsibility. My adoptive father learned to apologize without defending himself. My biological parents learned to accept help without interpreting it as pity. Sometimes we ate dinner together, all of us. And the conversation stayed on ordinary topics: food prices, weather, Lin Chen's work stories. Ordinary conversation is underrated. It's proof that crisis no longer owns the room. I never became sentimental about fate, but I did become attentive to choice. The story I fell into tried to reduce me to a disposable character, a placeholder who should step aside once the real daughter arrived. I refused that script. I refused to poison my parents' hearts with comparison. I refused to let someone else's performance turn my life into a courtroom where emotion was the only evidence. I chose method. I chose patience. I chose work. And those choices built a life no one could reassign with a knock on the door. Clear Mosaic's first real crisis came when a wealthy private school tried to use our system to quietly exclude scholarship applicants from certain neighborhoods. They claimed it was about risk management. The patterns in their request made the intention obvious. They wanted a filter that would convert prejudice into an automated decision, so no one had to say the ugly part out loud. My co-founder wanted to accept the contract because the money could fund development. I refused. "If we take this," I said, "we become a machine that does the same kind of damage that once tried to do me." We argued for hours. At the end, I reminded them that a company's first compromises define its later ones. We declined the contract. We nearly ran out of cash that quarter. Then a public university consortium offered us a smaller deal with stricter ethics requirements. We took it, and I slept better. The ethics decision didn't make us famous, but it made us trustworthy. Trust turned out to be a market advantage. Foundations that cared about fairness came to us precisely because we had said no to the school. When investors asked about growth, I talked about accountability metrics alongside revenue, reduced harassment incidents, improved appeals outcomes, fewer false accusations. Some investors rolled their eyes, others leaned forward. The ones who leaned forward were the ones we partnered with. In life, as in business, your allies are revealed by what they consider boring. On the anniversary of the hospital settlement, the advocacy group my adoptive mother volunteered with invited me to speak to new parents about newborn safeguards. I stood in a community hall with plastic chairs and told them practical things. Photograph wristbands, ask for verification, keep discharge papers. I also told them something less practical but more important. If a mistake happens, don't let guilt turn you cruel. A woman in the front row started crying quietly. After the talk, she said her baby had been misidentified once for an hour and she still couldn't forgive herself. I took her hands and said, "You're not asking for forgiveness. You're asking for certainty that you're a good mother. Being careful is proof enough." She nodded like she had been waiting for someone to say it. Later that week, my adoptive mother invited me to a small dinner at our old home. The house looked the same, but the atmosphere didn't. Lynn Ruo was there too, back from abroad for a short visit. She hovered near the doorway at first, unsure of her role. My adoptive father greeted her without anger and asked about her program. Lynn Ruo answered honestly, without theatrics, that it had been hard. My adoptive mother served food and didn't overcompensate with forced affection. The room felt awkward, but it felt real. After dinner, Lynn Ruo approached me on the balcony. City lights scattered below like spilled coins. She said, "I used to think your calm was arrogance." I replied, "It was survival." She swallowed and said, "I didn't know how to survive without making people look at me." I didn't comfort her, but I didn't mock her either. I said, "Learn a skill that makes you proud when no one is watching." She stared at the lights, then nodded. That was the closest we came to sisterhood. Not warmth, but a shared understanding that attention is not the same as value. When I returned home that night, my biological mother called to ask if I was safe. She still asked that sometimes, as if safety were a fragile object she could lose again. I told her I was fine. She hesitated and then said, softly, "Thank you for not hating us." I answered, "I don't hate people for being human." She laughed through tears. My biological father took the phone and said, "We're proud of you, Yue." It was the first time he had said my name without sounding like he was asking permission to claim it. I closed my eyes and let the words settle. People still try to rewrite my life from the outside. They like clean morals. The real daughter returns. The fake daughter steps aside. The family restores order. But my life was never about restoration. It was about construction. I built myself in layers. Discipline, evidence, boundaries, and the quiet refusal to become whatever someone needed me to be for their story. That refusal cost me comfort sometimes. It also gave me freedom. A year after graduation, I visited the exam center on a quiet morning when no students were lined up outside.